Nowadays, the use of fingerprints to aid in catching criminals is familiar and rarely questioned. But it wasn't always so. Once upon a time, this technology was new, untested, and untrusted, and it has only become part of modern crime fighting. But thanks to some early instances of its use, which proven its efficacy. Fingerprints identification is the method of identification using the impressions made by the minute ridge formation or pattern found on the fingertips. No two persons have exactly the same arrangement of ridge patterns, and the patterns of any one individual remain unchanged throughout life. Fingerprints offer an infallible means of personal identification. Other personal characteristics may change, but fingerprints do not.
The idea that fingerprints could be used as a means of personal identification was first put forward by Sir William Herschel, District Magistrate of Hockley District of Bengal Province in 1858. Later, Dr. Henry Foltz gave the idea of tracing a criminal from the Latin prints found at the scene of crime and came to the conclusion that no two fingerprints are alike. Based on the idea of Herschel and Foltz, Sir Francis Galton, the renowned English scientist, established scientifically the basic principles of uniqueness and permanency in fingerprints. In 1924, the Identification Division for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, was established to provide one central repository of fingerprints. When the Identification Division was established, its purpose was to provide a central repository of criminal identification data for law enforcement agencies throughout the nation. However, in 1933, the United States Civil Service Commission, now known as the Office of Personnel Management, turned the fingerprints of more than 140,000 government employees and applicants over to the FBI. Therefore, a civil identification section was established. These innovations marked the initiation to the FBI civil file, which was destined to dwarf the criminal files in size. In 1992, the Identification Division was re-established as the Criminal Justice Information Services Division, or CGIS.
Types of fingerprint patterns. Everyone's fingerprint are unique. However, specific patterns can be seen in fingerprints. The patterns may be further divided into subgroups by means of the smaller differences existing between the patterns in the same general group. Three types of fingerprints patterns are arc, loop, and whorl. First is arc. Arches are the simplest type of fingerprints formed by ridges that enter on one side of the print and exit on the other. No deltas are present. Second is loop. Loops must have the one delta and or more ridges that enter and leave on the same side. These patterns are named for their positions related to the radius and ulnar bones. And lastly is whorls. Whorls have at least one ridge that makes or tends to make a complete circuit. They also have at least two deltas.
The roles of fingerprint. Fingerprints have been the gold standard for personal identification in the forensic community for more than 100 years. Fingerprints are commonly used tools to understand the individuality of a person so as to reveal his or her identity. Usually, no crime can be committed without the aid and assistance of the hands, the prime body part of the person. Fingerprints are the permanent nature and they remain same throughout the life of an individual.
The function of fingerprint. The primary function of fingerprints is believed to be enhancing grip and providing tactile sensitivity. The ridges and valleys on our fingertips and palms allow us to grasp objects more effectively and sense their texture, temperature, and other physical properties. In fact, studies have shown that people with fewer and shallower fingerprints have less dexterity and tactile sensitivity in their hands.
Solved by fingerprint. In 1892, the double murder of two children in Argentina was first ever successful investigation of homicide using fingerprinting. The first murder solved by fingerprints was the case of Francesca Rojas in the town of Necochea, Argentina.
Francisca Rojas is believed to be the first criminal found guilty through fingerprint in the world. Francisca Rojas married a gentleman named Ponciano Rojas, and together they had two children, their 6-year-old son Ernesto Rojas and 4-year-old daughter Felisa Rojas. They live in a house a short distance from the main town. Ponciano worked long hours but only earned a modest income. Until one day, their marriage soon started to have difficulties, and there were rumors that Francisca had been seen on a number of occasions in the company of another gentleman. People would tell Ponciano that his wife was a bad woman, and eventually he decided to leave Francisca. Ponciano told her that he would be living elsewhere and taking the children with him. This greatly depressed Francisca, as although since the 1869 enactment of the Argentine civil codes where all civilians, both men and women, were considered equal, she knew that without the support of her husband their life would be very difficult. On the 19th of June, Ernesto and Felisa returned home. That's the time Francisca murdered her two innocent children. She killed her own children so that her husband can't have them. She noticed that her husband was coming. In an attempt to deflect the blame, she had cut her own throat. It was Sunday, so most people were not working. Concerned for his children, Ponciano went to see his neighbor, a gentleman named Ramon Velasquez, and he asked him if he could assist in trying to get into the house. But as they entered, neither gentleman was prepared for what they're about to find. Francisca was lying in the floor. She was bleeding from her neck. As they moved on to the bedroom, they found the children and they were both dead. Ramon immediately summoned help from the authorities. The first responders quickly arrived at the crime scene. As soon as Inspector Alvarez examined the crime, he contacted crime scene investigator Juan Vucetich. However, the key piece of evidence was a brown mark spotted on the bedroom window, which turned out to be a bloody fingerprint. The inspector thought it looked like the print from a woman's hand. He cut out 2 pieces of wood with a fingerprint on it. After Francisca was given medical attention, eventually the police were able to speak to her. She told them that it was her neighbor Ramon Velasquez. She claimed that Velasquez had been attempting to take her children away from her on her husband's instructions. Police questioned Velasquez. Though the poor man proclaimed his innocence, still Ramon Velasquez was arrested. The police officer invited Francisca into the police station and took a fingerprint of her and examined it. In 1892, the police department in Plata, Argentina had the very first working fingerprint database in the world. This had been created a year earlier by Juan Vocitich. When Juan Vocitich compared the fingerprints found at the scene of the double murder with those of Francisca Rojas, they were a match. Confronted with the evidence, Rojas immediately confessed to the crime and admitted her wounds have self-inflicted. It concludes that Ramon Velasquez is purely innocent. On September 20, 1894, Francisca Rojas was convicted of murder and imprisoned indefinitely.